What's going on, family? It's your brother Lawrence here with another episode of Required Reading. Now, I'm not going to waste time, as I always say. I'm going to get right to the first article, and I want to give a heads up that contains, discussion of sexual assault, rape, and pornography. And so I want to be sensitive to those of you that this will be triggering for. Now, the reality is that pornography is a real thing. And maybe for many of you who may be struggling with addiction or use it and don't necessarily see a issue or challenge with it. Um, I think one of the things about this article that is timely is the fact that in this pandemic, I think it's shown, at least in the United States, it's shown that our lives are intertwined. Very few of our decisions only impact us, it impacts other people. And there's this essentially this really even darker side of pornography, which is there is content of sexual assault and rape of children, not even not at any age that'd be an issue, but of children on the platform. And despite noted attempts to take it off, it shows how unbounding and how unyielding evil is. There is no boundary line that evil cannot cross through. And so he kind of walks through this. And here's the thing, the thing that threw me was just the pure numbers that Pornhub itself. Think about just the scale, the base. It's the 10th most visited site. Period. Every month, 3.5 billion people. And during this pandemic, 3.5 billion people more than Amazon, more than Netflix, more than Yahoo visit this site. And so if you can imagine on a baseline like that of use, what type of content and how much content that this is showing on this platform. And I think Nicholas Kristoff not only walks through how this is just this darker side of pornography, but ultimately how this is impacting people. And the thing that stuck out for me was beyond the numbers and beyond just kind of like just how the use of it. I think it was just how young these children are, how young these children are that for one of these young ladies who had made a decision, made an unwise decision. It was the boy had this act taped, young, preteen, and then from there had to spread around the school how many times she had to like they took it off and then it was re-uploaded. She'd moved schools, tried to kill herself 4 or 5 times, and how many countless stories of this are consistent because of this. And the fact is that this doesn't cross any filter. Doesn't be any there doesn't have to be any validation, no consent, nothing, right? And so by even contributing to it, by watching it, you're actually fueling and contributing to something that allows this type of exploitation. And now, I think when you put the faces and when you see and read the stories, I think it gives people another perspective of why, beyond just at least the research and beyond the impact that's already been written extensively about how pornography not only rewires your brain, and dehumanizes and objectivizes people, how it changes you, how it just the darker side of it. It also talks about just how this you contributing or anyone contributing to site, what this actually fuels. Because again, it's chicken and the egg, right? And when you see the greed and when you can make money from this content, you're fueling a business model. And the business model that is monetized by ad revenue. The more eyeballs on the content, the more money this makes. And so no one is ever a innocent voyeur, so to speak, or viewer of pornography. By every single eyeball, every single click contributes. And if it continues to make money, the incentive is that these models will continue to do this. And so I think it's helpful for everyone. But I think whether you're a parent and you're seeing how young these kids are that are already have free access to pornography, or whether you are just someone who is struggling with pornography and is continuing to find ways or trying to look for motivation beyond help that you should get, but there's readily available help you should get for it, that this may be another incentive to see kind of the darker sides of pornography and why your decision to overcome it will help a lot. So I think Nicholas Kristoff did an amazing job, and hats off. And again, The Children of Pornhub by Nicholas Kristoff in the New York Times. Please read it. Um, this next article, How Hollywood is Preparing to Sacrifice Movie Theaters by David Sims. And we've talked about the movie theater issues, but this was a big heads. This was a big headline. Warner Media, more recently, one of the world's biggest movie studios, made a decision that in 2021, all of its feature releases, movie theater feature releases, are going to be released for a 1 month window on HBO Max. This is a big deal for many people. You don't know, most of the films, when a film comes out, there's a restriction, right? There is a window of time that it's in the theaters. Then from theaters, it goes into video on demand, and then obviously the kind of like your direct access on demand or not on demand. Um, and this decision is heavy because it's one of those things that you can't take back. And I think this is what the article is kind of pointing up, is that once you've kind of conditioned consumers to know that they can get this in real time, the impact is going to have on exhibitioners, aka movie theaters, who are already struggling on their last few dollars for cash flow, barely able to make it into 2021. This may be the dagger. And the reality is that this is not necessarily the most profitable, right? When you think about streaming, and how much money per subscriber, you may be, it's not necessarily the most profitable area. But then again, how much money is $0 when you can't release a film and people won't show up because you're in a pandemic and it doesn't look like it's going to recur or resolve anytime soon. And so I can understand the tension that Warner Media is under, but it could set off a domino effect. And I don't necessarily know the a complete right answer, but I do think that I get it. And I do think that this is kind of challenging the models. And I think it may streamline. At the end of the day, there may be certain films that are made. I think you may have more theaters that shrink down their footprint. They have more boutique experiences, and you have more boutique experiences that the people could charge more for. I do think that this may push some innovation, but I'm hoping that movie theaters remain, because I think moviegoers will go to the movies when it's safe. The reality is that this is something that may shake the industry forever, right? Forever. I think the downside for me, I think similar to the convenience of being able to order your groceries, is the reality that there are, sooner or later, there will be little to no incentive to leave your home at all. And I think the reality is that I think we need some forcing mechanisms of people to actually interact with people, as much as possible. And so I think that's one of the things that weighs on me as this big change happens. And I think David Sims touches on it, but I think it's worth a read. Again, Hollywood is preparing to sacrifice movie theaters in the Atlantic by David Sims. Definitely read it. This last article, shout out to my brother Brandon. He gave me the tee up, by David Wallace Wells. We had the vaccine the whole time, and it's a New York Magazine. Now, a number I first read it, I was like, here we go. Because here's the thing, I've been really a bit frustrated by even some of the initial talk around the vaccine or potential vaccine rolling out. Because I think if you're anyone of any melanated persuasion of this country, you recognize that attitude towards vaccination, there's a healthy suspicion. It doesn't. You could, two things could be true. You could essentially want to be doing the things that's going to make sure that everybody's the safest, while at the same time recognizing that even with this, you don't the long term effects have not been determined. And on top of that, like, you don't know what the impact is going to be, right? You may solve one thing and then now you're setting yourself up. And given the incidences of so much disease, so much cancer, there's so many things that I think that people don't really fully understand the gravity of. And it takes time to see the impact of things. And given just how expedited these processes are, there's a healthy suspicion. And I think anyone being shouted down because they're concerned or not wanting to take a vaccine is just something I think that we should be very careful and cautious when using our words towards it. All that to say, this article was interesting because I think it kind of pulled the veil back on what the actual process looks like, right? And one of the big things that this kind of talked about is how, you know, you would think that based on this, that essentially testing just started yesterday on these vaccines. But most of these vaccines, from the moment that that these diseases actually come, most of these vaccines have already started their trials, like, and so it's actually this parallel processing that takes place that I never really understood. On top of that, when you think about the flu, influenza and the flu, many of the trials for this are actually kind of preempted. They actually create potential vaccinations even before it comes out. And so what this is showing is it's saying that, you know what, um, there may be other options, right? Especially because by the time that most of these vaccines are ready to go in the current process, it is already too late. Most of the death, the toll has happened. On top of that, you actually have by that point, most of herd immunity might be at least built up. I'm not saying we're anywhere near that. But what is just challenging is saying, hey, there may be actually a more effective way for us to think about rolling these things out. It may also include the fact that in many cases, not for the healthy population, but for those who are essentially at the facing death, that they actually have a choice, because essentially when you're testing them, and by the time they get to that round of testing in that phase, right, there's a pretty good sense that this thing is going to work, right? Again, this is not about expediting a virus that's not tested. But by the time you get to those stages, it may be worth introducing them to certain populations where they're able to test it out, because it's like life and death, right? And they actually assume the risk, like many of these kind of trial drugs, to see if it will work. On top of that, I think the biggest takeaway, though I'm not necessarily the biggest proponent of that, is the fact that there's money that could be put towards, once you get a family of diseases, starting the trial process earlier, so that you're not waiting right until day one you hear about the virus to actually start the process, which actually saves some time. It can reduce even the timeline to 90 days. Now, again, I am not a clinician in this context, but I thought it was important to just take away in layman's terms. Wow, there is a way that perhaps they could do this a lot more quickly without sacrificing safety. And given the fact that you cannot take people's lives back, isn't it worth exploring how we could better do this? And are there other comparable options for us, or comparable examples of how we do this? And influenza is one. The fact that they actually anticipate strains of a virus, not using the actual virus, but using synthetically, so that they're ahead of the curve when the season comes. More than anything, it was just interesting to see the fact that there's a whole kind of underbelly world of how this works, who has access to it, what other countries do, how some of them have already been administering a vaccine. Again, my takeaway in general is I do think that there's healthy caution. I think there's something to educate the population about. But I think even with the confusion, even with the exhaustion, I think it's a healthy article to read, to understand, just better understand how these phases and these trials and these drugs do work, how they're rolled out. But I still think that we're still at a stage where you're still assuming some level of risk. But I think you have no choice, given the reality and the toll that it's had on this country, on the world. You can't bring people's lives back. I think anything you can do within kind of the will of God and resources we've been given, I think it's worth it. But I think this was just really educational to learn. So again, we had the vaccine the whole time by David Wallace Wells. Strongly recommend you read it, just to get a better understanding of how the clinical trial process works, and maybe and some opportunities to make it more seamless, and opportunities that, quite frankly, we already take into account and approach other diseases with. So I think this is helpful. Again, we have the three articles this past week. We have our Warner Media, we have the New York Times, the Children of Pornhub, and then we have this New York Magazine article. We had the vaccine the whole time. So again, three great articles. As always, we welcome your thoughts and comments on the articles from this week, but also any articles you come across, definitely send them my way. Would love to share it with everyone else. Take care, y'all.